So, I wasn't sure if I was going to know how to start this video. And I'm definitely not sure how I'm going to continue it. But what I do know is that I have something to tell you. And what I'd like to talk about today is simultaneously a question, an answer, and what is. And what I mean by that really is I want to tell you what's going on because I've been living with it for a little bit too long. I know it a little too well. And I want other people to know, and I would love to share what it is that I know, because I think that it is just so truly fascinating, and that it is indeed something that we all ought to be privy to. So, what I have to share with you, I envision a whiteboard on my wall where I can draw out this diagram to you. Let me remove my clutter. So when I say what I want to talk to you about, well, let's start from somewhere simple. What I see a lot of people concerned about these days, and what has become the primary focus and simultaneously the primary drought of our society, and of our ability to function culturally, and why things are becoming so problematic, is facts. I mean that literally. Facts. I would like to talk about facts today. And so I'm not sure how many people have ever questioned this or really wondered deeply, intuitively, what a fact is. And so I'd like to break it down. I'd like to explain that and give some insight into what it is that we're dealing with when we talk about and discuss and debate facts. So, a fact is the primary constituent, meaning the thing that is with status, of a factor, a factor. And it's important to understand that factors are components of a system, right? Factors are components of a system which are worth considering. That would be a layman's or general term for definition of factor. And so factors are actually composed of fractions, and the fractions of factors we call factoids. And those factoids come together to develop a factor which we view as a fact. So, simply, what I want to point out here is that when we talk about a fact, what is it that a fact produces? Is produced of factors. Factors have fractions. Fractions of factors are factoids, and those factoids are in themselves factors which produce the fact. And when we look at this more broadly, what we see behind every fact, if we look into the languages, stick with me here, a fact is a finite action. A finite action, or if you were to take part finite, fin, which Latin root is to be the end, an end action, which is what a fact is. It is the coming to a point, and behind every fact, there's a point. If you're stating a fact, you have a point to be made. And so we come to realize that facts are just points within a system. And what is a point? Well, a point is actually nothing. It's a nothing. When you come to a point, it is a determination of wherein lies the destination, or lack thereof, to go further. And from that point, we draw conclusion. And that is what a fact is. It is littered throughout reality. We have facts. Okay? And it's important that we don't get caught up with facts, because the facts are not the important part. And what I'd like to emphasize even more is that it is actually within the nature of facts, which are composed of factors, or derived from, and which derive factors, factors which are broken down into fractions, and those fractions are factoids, which derives our facts. Just to go through it one more time. All of those facts, all of those points within the system that show us where the nothingness, where we have arrived at a point. Once you get to a point, there is no further, there is no length, width, height, or dimension to a point. It is simply a nothing. We have within a system many different points, and the important aspect is the patterns. And what do we see from these patterns? Interestingly enough, fractals. Fractals. The parts of facts which are factors broken into fractions, and those fractions are splayed out as factoids, are actually fractals. They produce a pattern which is a fractal pattern. And this is literally littered throughout reality. You can see fractals everywhere. They are in nature, they're in math, they're in physical reality within things. There are fractals in that wall. There's fractals within energetic wave patterns, frequencies, vibration, everything which constructs physical reality. Viewed, it must be viewed from a particular lens. You have to have a scope and then an actual perspective on what it is that you have a scope around. You don't sit down and use a microscope in order to look at your, determine whether or not your fingernail is on the tip of your finger. You don't need a microscope for that. So we have proper scope. If we're trying to determine what's on the end of our finger, our scope is here. And we have proper perspective, proper lens. So yeah, that's the fingernail. But if you were to take this and you stick it under a microscope, you see a whole different world. And you see entirely new perspective and entirely new pattern. That pattern, however, is exactly the same as it previously was, just that you are now viewing it from a different perspective. And my meaning in saying this, my meaning in talking about this at all, is because not having to do anything with society, not having anything to do with really where I started with this, but is to discuss and to bring about a cohesive and final comprehension of God. And I don't say that lightly. It is extremely important that we note what God is. And very few people truly come to understand this. I think it's primarily because of simplicity. It is the fault of simplicity, which oftentimes simplicity is actually derived from a great complexity. If you were to have a simple solution to something, it's likely going to take a complex system or a complex action in order to achieve that simplicity. And oftentimes complex things are built off of simplicity. It's sort of this recursive, iterating thing that permeates. So, for example, just to bring some tangible, palpable idea of what I mean is, take a tree, for example. A tree, we see trees everywhere, all over the entire planet. We take them for granted, I would say, and look at them quite simply. It is a tree. You draw a tree, it stands up, it's got a few branches and some leaves speckled out there. But when you truly observe and study a tree, there is nearly infinite complexity from man's eye alone. Not to look at any of the microscopic scale of it, not to look at the roots, not to look at any of the communication patterns that trees have going on through the release of different chemicals or across different ecosystems and environments and species, and just look at a single tree. And in itself, can you count how many branches it has? If I were to ask you, not how tall, but how long is that tree, would you even know where to start? Do you even know how to measure the length of a tree? I don't. Yet, within this vastly complex thing, we know it's derived on an extremely simple premise that the tree grows opposing gravity and at some point develops a node. And this node branches out in the same manner that the original did. And this node also develops a node. and branches out, and this node also develops a node. And so the simplicity to it is that it's just nodes being added on to lengths. And yet we get this vastly massive interwoven art, and that's just looking at it from a plain old nothing perspective, from just a dude on a sidewalk or a chick on a sidewalk taking a stroll. So these simple things produce vastly complex systems or organisms, and those vastly complex organisms are viewed quite simply. We say that is one tree, right? We can break it down and just be like, oh, here's a simple way to look at it. It's one tree. And then it can get more complicated. Well, how many of these trees are trees? Is a tree ever fully a tree? Because a tree tends to grow until it dies. And you know, get into the same thing with life growing, humans aging, and it reminds me of the paradox of the car, which is constantly undergoing replacement and repair of parts. At which point is the car still a car and no longer the original? That's a similar fundamental idea that I can relate to this. But the main takeaway being that simple things are typically actually quite complex, and complex things are typically actually built off of things that are quite simple. That is such an important realization and acknowledgement to be made as we talk about God. And what are some things that are God? Okay, we're going to step over to my imaginary whiteboard here. I would argue that the things which most closely resemble God, or which we have knowledge of, really, I'd start with math. Because math is the language of God. Math is how God communicates. Okay? And from math we get physics. And we know that physics is part of our reality. And what are we without our reality? From physics, we get chemistry. And from chemistry, we get biology. And thus we are. And thus so is everything else. And from biology, we have history or evolution. And from our historical evolution, we have culture. From culture, we've derived society. And now we're here in the midst of this modern society and this sort of thing. It's quite messy. The main point that I'm trying to make here, I'm breaking it down into a very simple lineage. And it's truly derived off of a vastly complex relationship. And it is so utterly important that we know what God is, and that we don't confuse what God is not. So this could take a long time. Simply put, God is. So, what I mean by that is that God is this ever-presentness. It is this isness. And most of the time when I, even hearing it come out of my mouth, it's like, what? Right? Because nobody talks like that. Nobody communicates in that way. But it is the Yahweh. It is I am. I am is. And is. Okay? And so the reason that I say that and the reason that I bring it up in that way is because of language itself. Okay? Somewhere around here where we had evolution history broke up into culture, and our culture and society is founded purely off of our capacity to communicate and what we communicate and how we communicate. And at the basis of that was math. Math was the language that God spoke. And it is the code by which the universe was written. And as we explore it more and more, we find out that it is ever changing and ever present. Not saying that math, that the things that work in math, those are what I would consider, again, coming full circle, that is a fact. When we say that if we wanted to use physics, force equals mass times acceleration. Maybe one more familiar to most people would be that E equals mc squared, which is energy is equal to mass times the speed of light squared. That's not because it makes more sense, but just because it's more familiar. So the point that I'm making, my fact, is that each of those equations are simply facts. They're just a point to be made. They are not the answer. They are not the solution. They are equivalent, and they have coincided. And these coincidences or coincidences are constantly coming together, breaking apart, and making new things occur. And from those facts, all of those factors in our reality, in our system of reality, we are piecing together to derive a pattern. And whether you know it or not, you actually do this in your brain every single day. Every single day, every single neuron that fires, every single electron that transfers from one molecule to another, within every cell of your body, is abiding by the facts and coming together to produce this pattern of reality that we see today. And this is so crucial and so important because these patterns are what truly define and enable us to identify God. And God is not this stagnant thing. It frustrates me when people misinterpret by law within religion, religious law, that God is somehow in some way this very cut and dry structure, this sort of, not sure how I would say it necessarily, but that there is a yes and a no. It's very extremely logical approach to what we have as extremely illogical, but founded upon logic. That's the tricky part. That's the weird thing. All of these points, all of these coincidences are yeses and nos. So subversively, beneath the language that we know, beneath what is spoken, there's an intuitive or an inherent yes or no. And so it's very important, especially if you're reading scripture, or if you're talking about God in general, that we recognize there's a subversive language being spoken, and that there's something beneath what we're talking about, or in the same sense, above. Like I said, this could take a long time, and I'm gonna try to keep it as succinct as I can for now. And my point simply, and can't make, like I said earlier, I can't make a simple point without it being a very complex basis. But my point is that God is likely not what you think it is. And if you don't believe in God, you have a misconception of what God is. God is not something that you believe or misbelieve or disbelieve or that you can argue about. And people who, put that out there, I mean, people who even really try to debate God, the existence of it, are confused on what it is. God is not this holy, crusted white man with a big beard in the sky. When the Bible says that we were made in His image, it is saying an immensely complex amount of things in one little go. And you are meant to derive many, 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 many truths from that one truth. And from that one statement, you can identify the pattern. That itself is the key to recognizing that everything that this is all about really is patterns. The way that we learn is based on patterns, repetitiveness. Why do we love color and things that, come together and create form and structure and architecture and aesthetically interesting things, because it reminds us of our origin, which is the math, which is the language that we were communicated to, which is God, and that is continuously ever unfolding in front of us, and will never cease as long as any of us are alive to witness it. And And with that, I think I have given everything I have today. I really hope that this meant something to you, and that I did, in fact, prove a point. If you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, disagreements, agreements, comments, leave them there. Until next time, talk again. Peace.